Hello everybody. So it's a beautiful day here in sunny Orlando, and I am going to be heading over to the Orlando Brewing Company for a tour. What's really cool about this tour is it's free. I hope it's as cool as some of the ones that you end up having to pay for, but I'm kind of excited. I'm hoping that there's some different types of beers. I really do like microbrews, so I'm hoping there's some new like amber ales or lagers or something that I'll enjoy trying.
For the day I break these chains, I'm bound for the life of the simple things.
Okay guys, I'm just pulling in here to the Orlando Brewery at 1301 Atlanta Avenue. Thank you, sir. Yep.
Again, the tour is going to cover three main things. First one is I'm going to talk why our beer is organic and how it becomes organic. Second is I like to talk about what are the actual ingredients we use to make our beer. And third, I actually like to talk about how we brew beer with the system I'm standing on right now. So I like to cover those three main points. And as I cover those three main points, I'm going to talk a lot about Orlando Brewing and our history too. So if you guys just stay with me, it all makes sense at the end. It all comes full circle. The brewery is one big life cycle. Beer is a perishable product, so it always has to be rotating through and through. So everything I'm showing you is part of the beer life cycle back here in the brewery. First thing I like to talk about is why our beer is organic. When we brew our beer, that's not what makes our beer organic. What makes our beer organic is how they grow the ingredients we use to make beer. And the two main ingredients they grow are hops and barley. When they grow those hops and barley, they have to follow a lot of rules, but I like to bring up three main ones that truly makes a product organic or not. First one is you're not going to find any GMOs in our beer, genetically modified organisms. That means when they grow those hops and barley, they aren't altering them with radiation, electronics, gene splicing. Monsanto does not touch our beer at all. And all Monsanto is a big GMO company that makes GMOs for the whole United States. There's a lot of issue with GMOs I have with, but the biggest one being is Monsanto. When you go buy your food in the stores and you look on the back of those labels, they'll never say we use GMOs to make this food. And that's because Monsanto lobbies and takes that choice away from you. That's why I really don't like GMOs. Really, they're taking the choice away from me from knowing what's exactly in my food. Same if you look on this back of the label and you read natural flavoring. Who knows what that means at all? There's so many crazy things that FDA lets pass, and GMOs is one of them. That's why I like our beer, because you're going to know what's in it at all times, the four main ingredients we need to make beer. So that's why we don't have to worry about GMOs, and genetically modified organisms are not organic, so you can never categorize that as an organic ingredient. So we're moving on to the second thing. When they grow those crops, they use things called animal byproducts like horse, cow, chicken, and pig manure. They use that manure because it's high in nitrogen. When you put that much nitrogen into a small area, it grows crops faster than normal. But when you do that also, you have a lot of bad side effects to the environment. Just imagine putting that much nitrogen to one area, all that runoff from those fields has to go somewhere, and it usually ends up in a lake or in a field that doesn't belong, and it ruins those ecosystems. It really destroys them over periods of time. Lake Apopka, just west of here, has had field runoff going in through the last 20, 30 years, and they have a huge problem with that ecosystem in that lake, and it actually changes the color of the lake too. It's really not good, and that's why when you drink our beer, I have peace of mind. I don't have to worry about us destroying a lake somewhere or something like that. So that's why I like our beer. And the third, and I think the major play in organic beer, is that they don't spray those crops with pesticides or insecticides. Things like DDT, malathion, brethium, diazion, just nerve agents that kill those little bugs that eat our hops and barley plants. You just gotta think, maybe there's some residue that gets left over in the end product of your food or drink, and maybe that's a very, very, very small amount. And if you eat that food every now and then, that's fine. It's not gonna do any harm to your body. But you eat that over 20, 30, 40 years, it's gotta have some sort of side effect, health effect to our overall body. So that's why I love our beer. You don't have to worry about that at all. So when producers follow those three main things, they're not lot more to grow those crops. So when it comes to making our beer, it costs more too. Our beer costs around 2 times as much as regular beer to make. So that's why there's only really 11 USDA approved organic breweries in the United States, because a big issue is it's really not cost efficient at all. You gotta go up to Vermont, you gotta go to Wisconsin, Colorado, Washington, Oregon, California to find the other USDA approved breweries. We're the only one in the southeastern states. This is the only place you're gonna find this type of beer and an actual functioning organic brewery, and that's why I need a drink real fast. Cheers. Only bad part about my tour is I just talk. I don't get to drink. So again, you gotta give me a couple pauses every now and then. So that's one of the big factors when it comes to actually making organic beer. Another thing I like to impart to you guys is that when you buy an organic ingredient, you always want to see the little USDA approved stamp on that ingredient. That means it's truly 100% organic. You could buy other organic food out there. By law, you can call something organic if it's made up of 75 to 95% organic ingredients. So if you buy other organic beer or food out there, you just gotta know if it doesn't have that green USDA approved stamp on it, it's not truly organic. So when it comes to that kind of stuff, I just wanted to give you that knowledge because I didn't know about that until I read about it. So it's just one of those things most people really don't know about. But when it comes to making our beer, we're truly organic. When we get our organic ingredients, we always need 4 to make what we call beer: water, hops, yeast, and barley. I want to tell you where we get them from and how each one individually affects the product of our beer. So we have our first ingredient, our water. Everything liquid in your beer, the base of your beer. If you use unfiltered water, just you pull it out of the tap, you're going to get all flavors in your beer. You actually want to use good tasting water, filtered water when it comes to making beers, because you don't want any off flavors in it. And when it comes to the state of Florida, we have some of the best water in the states because of what actually happens to our water. Underneath the state of Florida is the Florida aquifer. And that aquifer pushes water through this massive cave system right below us. And that cave system is lined with the 4 greatest things to ever happen to water. We have our silica sand, our diatomaceous earth, our clay, and our limestone. The first 3 filter our water. It takes a lot of the bad taste, a lot of those tastes you won't find in your beer, takes them out of the water, and it makes the water pretty much close to crystal clear. And then the 4th ingredient, the limestone, puts minerals in our water that we need to make good beer. Minerals like magnesium, calcium, zinc, iron. We need those minerals to make good tasting beer, so we have hard water and have good pH levels. So the state of Florida naturally does that for us. We don't have to do all these extra steps when that water gets in here at all. The water is pretty much 100% where we want it when it gets pulled out of the actual Florida aquifer. The only bad thing is by state law, we're not allowed to pull that water out of the ground ourselves. We have to buy our water from a treatment plant. And that treatment plant is called OUC, Orlando Utilities Council. Out there, they pull the water out of the ground, and they do 2 awful things to it. They treat it with chlorine and fluoride. By state law, they're supposed to. You have to, just so that it makes the water drinkable, kills all the leftover bacteria in it. But when you put those 2 flavors in that water, you don't want that in your beer. You don't want that pool taste in your beer, those medical flavors in your beer. So when the water gets sent here, that's the only thing we got to do to it, strip those 2 things out. So water gets pumped here, and we run it through our 2 big inline filters all the way out the back. They're around 5 by 6 feet, and they're filled with around 500 pounds of activated charcoal. That charcoal is going to attack dichlorine and fluorine, but leave all the other great stuff in that water, and we'll have our nice filtered OUC water. We'll also run into our hot liquor tank, which is this tank right here, and our cold liquor tank, which is just to the left of it. Looks exactly like that. And we'll have hot and cold water ready to use for the brewing process. Excuse me. We'll also run a line out to our water fountain. If you had a glass of our filtered water and you had a glass of tap water, you'd see a huge difference in that taste. And that's a big taste difference you're going to find in your water. A lot of people I've talked to about our water say it's awful. It tastes some of the worst water I've ever had. They're drinking straight tap water. You have to filter those chlorine and fluorine flavors out if you want to actually get great water. So you just got to keep that in mind. That's why Zephyr Hills, Crystal River, all the big name water companies come to Florida and pull our water out and sell it right back to us. The biggest scam I've ever seen, like one of the biggest scams out there. So again, you just got to understand that they're pulling that water straight from Florida and selling it right back to you, just in a nice plastic bottle. So you can just pour it, get your water right through a filtration system and get the same exact water. So again, that's our water. Cool thing about water is where you get it from can dictate a lot of the taste in your beer. If we actually pulled water from Belgium, brought it over here and brewed our same beer with it, it would taste a little different. Because the water over there has different mineral contents in it, different pH levels, going to change the flavor of your beer. So again, the water can dictate a lot of the taste in your beer. That's why all our beer has some sort of similar taste to it, because we use the same water in all of them. So that's our first ingredient. We're moving on to our second now, which is my favorite, the hops. What hops do to our beer is it gives us all that great bitterness, all those great floral, earthy, piney smells and taste, and it helps naturally preserve our beer. Alcohol and hops are the two determinants on how long your beer is going to survive. If you actually stored our Browne Ale in the cooler and you stored our hop gasmic in the same cooler, the Browne Ale might last 6 weeks, but that hop gasmic is going to last a year maybe. A little, maybe even longer, mattering how high the alcohol and hop content is in that actual beer. So again, hops help naturally make your beer last longer. Since Florida is good for water, we got to be bad for something, and that's hops. You can't really grow them out here for a lot of different reasons, but the main one being the massive amount of rainfall that happens in such a short amount of time. Hops grow just kind of like grapes on these vines that shoot out of the ground, and all that massive rainfall is going to actually choke those plants out. That's a big issue why. And our soil's not actually best to grow hops, so we usually have to get them all the way out on the west coast, usually from states like Oregon and Washington. There are 24 hop families out there that make up 37% of the hop production for the whole world. So we guys can pick a litter. We can choose a lot of different hops out there when it comes to picking organically. There's over 120 different styles of hops out there, so there's a lot of different things you can do to your beer based on bitterness, flavoring, and aromatics. So we get the hops sit here, we store them in the cooler, and that will be our second ingredient. Ready to move on to our third now, the barley. And what barley does to our beers, it gives us all those great flavors from chocolate to caramel to roasted, and it gives us the sugars we need to make alcohol. Every alcoholic beverage needs sugar. When it comes to making cider, we need those apples. When it comes to making wine, we need those grapes. When it comes to making moonshine, we want those potatoes. When it comes to making beer, we want the barley. And that's because around 500 years ago, the Germans kind of discovered this was the best thing to use. This would make pure beer, as they call it. When the Germans come out and say pure beer, they're always going to use barley as their sugar substitute. And that's why it's a standard now for the whole world. Barley is pretty much the actual sugar substitute you need to make your beer taste like a beer. So what we get actually from the barley is that sugar and those tastes, but we don't grow our barley here. We buy it from Grease Malts in Chilton, Wisconsin. We buy it from them because they mass produce it, but they also malt that barley. When you think of barley, you think of those long stands of grain blowing in the wind, fully 100% mature barley. When it comes to making beer, we can't use that at all because that barley has tons of protein in there. When it comes to making beer, we can't have any protein at all. The saddest fact I could give you is that you just can't drink beer all the time and survive. You actually got to eat something every now and then because protein is not found in our beer. It clouds our beer, puts off flavors in our beer, and it stops us from creating alcohol in our beer. So that's why we have to malt the barley, pretty much put the sugars and starches in their one particular place. That's what the malted barley looks like. So what Grease Malts does is they actually grow that barley to around 50%, around there. They chop it down, bring it into their big warehouses, throw it in water, and actually control the growth of that barley. As that barley starts growing, all these little kernels on the end of the stalks are going to form like you see in those medicine bottles. And inside those kernels are the sugars and starches we need to make beer. If they bloom and open, those turn into protein and you get your end product of barley. So again, we only want the crystallized kernels when it comes to making beer. They malt it for us. They send it to here in these big old 50-pound chicken feed bags. We store them in our grain container right over in this corner. You'll see more in the back. and that's our third and final actual ingredient we need to make beer. So when we go to make beer, we've created our malty, hoppy sugar water with our first three ingredients. How do we get the alcohol in our beer? That comes with the fourth and final ingredient we need, the yeast. What actually yeast is all these little tiny microscopic organisms that are floating in the air above us right now. And what they do to survive in the air is they eat the oxygen and produce CO2. But we found if you take that oxygen away from the yeast, the next thing it's going to want to eat is sugar. And when it eats sugar, it produces alcohol. That's pretty much what we're doing inside of our beer when we create it. We take the oxygen out, so it has to eat the sugar and produce alcohol. The only reason why it's not raining alcohol all around us right now is because there's plenty of oxygen for the yeast to survive. So that's what we're doing for our beer. We get our yeast from White Yeast Labs in Sacramento, California. We don't have the technology or the equipment to take the yeast out of the air, but they do. They actually cultivate that yeast and send us the end product strand here for us to use for the brewing process. We store it in our cooler, and that will be our fourth and final ingredient we need to make beer. So when it comes to making beer, you really only need those four. Tons of types of water out there, over 120 different kinds of hops, over 60 kinds of barley, over 100 strands of yeast out there. All those can play different factors to create around 70, 80 types of beer and 40 to 50 substyles of beer. So you really only need those four ingredients to make a solid beer. But we do have a fifth that we call adjuncts. Adjuncts can be fruit, extracts, spices, anything from like jalapenos to lavender, whatever you want to put in your beer that you can't get from the natural four ingredients when it comes to making beer. So again, adjuncts are found in a lot of beers. Most of our beers here, 19 or 25, are pure beers, only the four ingredients, but we have a couple that aren't. Our Eve's Tonic has apple extract and oak wood in it. Our Grapefruit Pale has grapefruit in it. Our Rosy River has lavender and rose hips. And again, people love adjunct beers. They love a beer that doesn't taste like a beer. Me, on the other end, I can't stand them. So again, it's up to you, just mattering what you like in a beer and how you like the taste. So again, matters on your palate. So those are our five ingredients. Next, we're going to actually take those ingredients and actually brew beer. And what I'm standing on right now is Orlando Brewing's 15-barrel brew house. We measure beer in barrels. One barrel equals 31 gallons of beer. So we're producing around 350 to 400 gallons of beer out of batch every time we brew off this machine. We have the capability of brewing back here around 12 times a week if we want to, but we actually yield around 2,000 plus, mattering how many batches we make a week. So this is our system. We have our four ingredients. We're going to run through the process, and I'm going to show you how we actually use those four ingredients to make our beer. So I need another drink real fast. All right, guys, you still with me? I know it's a lot of information, but stay with me. It almost makes all sense. It almost is going to make sense. So we started our whole brewing process on the hot side. Our brew house is called the hot side of the brewing process. It takes 7 to 8 hours. And we start the whole process with this green machine right behind you guys, our grist mill. The first thing we're going to do when we create a beer is decide our grain bill. And when we decide our grain bill, that's going to dictate how much barley and what kind of barley we're going to put in our beer. That's going to dictate how much sugar we put in our beer, meaning how much alcohol we create, and what are those barley flavors we're going to create in our beer. So if we're making a stout, of course we're going to use that chocolate barley. We're going to use those heavier roasted barleys to make that stout. If we're making our Browne Ale out there, our lightest beer here, we're going to have the smallest grain bill ever, just so you have a nice, easy, drinkable, light, crisp beer. So again, it just matters what type of beer you're making decides what kind of grain bill you have. This machine can hold around 1,100 pounds of barley, so we're going to put as much barley for a mattering style of beer through that little grist mill. Now as those little kernels go through the grist mill, there's going to be little rollers in there that crack open that barley in half, and that's going to allow us to take the sugars out later on. We mill our malted barley, we shoot it up our white auger here, our self-propelled tube, all the way into our bread container. After we got it all up in there, we'll move our hot water from our hot liquor tank to this middle tank right here that we call the mash tun, and we push all the barley into that hot water. And Thanks to the hotness of that water, it extracts all the sugars from the barley and infuses them with the water to create our sugar water. So now we have something to put the yeast in to create alcohol, and we gave up all those good barley tastes inside of our beer. We call that the mash-in or the steep-in process. After that, we'll move it for the first time into this machine right here that we call the lauter tun. The next biggest issue we face is all that barley in our beer. You don't want to drink a beer and have a mouthful of barley, so that's what this actually tank's going to do, take all that barley out so that we have a nice drinkable beer. And it does that through the use of gravity. A little lower than my foot right there is a false bottom, about that much higher than the real bottom. And that false bottom has tiny little slits in it. As we move all that barley and sugar water over in here, that barley gets caught on the false bottom, but the sugar water goes through the barley to the real bottom in a process we call the sparge. We're just using gravity to our advantage. We move all that sugar water to the real bottom, move it back into our mash tun. We had the two ingredients separated from each other. Now that we have the barley separated, we got to do something with it. We took all the sugars out already, so if we went to mashing again with it, we'd be unsuccessful in creating alcohol. So that's why we call this barley spent grain now, sugarless barley. It's still all organic, high in protein, high in fiber. We just don't want to throw it away. That'd be a big waste. I'd have to go to the dump every week, so I'm happy we don't have to do that. So we can give it away a lot of times to farms here in Florida. There's a lot of USDA approved farms here in Florida, biggest one being in DeLand called Heritage Farms. They'll come take this barley off our hands and feed it to all their animals. We give it to them for free because if we try to sell it, we get taxed more than we can actually make on it. So we just give it to them. In return, they'll actually give us a bunch of cool food that they have left over, like eggs, produce, meats. It's a good barter system. No one wastes anything. That's what the whole brewery's about, not wasting anything. So we'll shovel out that barley through the side door, give it to the farmer, and next we'll focus on our next part of the brewing process, our boil. Just like the mash-in puts the barley into your beer, the boil is going to put the hops into your beer, pretty much following the same procedure again. So what we're going to do is decide our hop schedule now. Just like the grain bill, the hop schedule is going to dictate a lot of the bitterness, flavoring, and aromatics in your beer based on what kind of hops and how many you put in your beer. So if we're making an IPA, of course we're going to put a lot more hops in there. If we're making our Browne Ale again, we're not going to put that many hops in. So it just dictates the style of beer. We pick our hop schedule, we put it in the boil. After that, we move it for the third time to the whirlpool machine, which actually takes the actual hops out of the end product of your beer, just like the barley and the lauter tun does. We use gravity again. On the other side of this tank is one giant jet that creates a massive whirlpool in here. Thanks to the force of that whirlpool, all those hops get sent down to the center of the tank. They group up in a nice big ball. As we siphon that sugar water out the side, there's a hand in there that actually grabs that ball of hops so it doesn't fall out. We'll let the sugar water go through. This again using gravity and both these tanks to remove the barley and hops so that they're not in the end product of your beer. So next, we're going to whirlpool and shoot all that sugar water out the side. And the next step we're going to have to do is run it through that giant metal box right there that we call the heat exchanger. As this sugar water is coming out of the whirlpool, it's still going to be around 200 degrees. And if we add the yeast right in that hot water, we're going to kill it immediately because the yeast isn't surviving at 200 degrees in the air around us. It's got to stay within the perfect temperature to produce alcohol. So that's why we have the heat exchanger to drop the temperature of that sugar water. Pretty much that thing's a giant radiator. Inside there are 40 stainless steel plates that help us exchange the heat and coolness of two different liquids. We're going to run our chilled down 30-degree OEC water in our cold liquor tank from the bottom of those plates up, our 200-degree sugar water from the top of those plates down. The top of those plates get super hot, the bottom gets super cold. So two different liquids at the two different plates, they exchange their heat. That water's going to heat up around 180, 200 degrees. We store it all back in our hot liquor tank. So when Graham or Travis, our two brewmasters, get here in the morning, whoever's brewing, all they have to do is move that hot water back into their mash tun and start the whole process over again. There's no lag time, like heating up 15 barrels of water can take an hour or two. And we don't shoot 15 barrels of water down the drain every time we brew. So having the heat exchanger is a must. It saves you time and it saves you tons of money and you don't waste anything. So that's why I have the heat exchanger. Move the hot water in there. Next we're going to move our actual sugar water through our orange meter hoses, through that middle conical right there by that blue switch. As we move that sugar water through that middle conical, we're gonna flick open that little blue switch, and we're gonna enrich our sugar water with oxygen. And when you get to the cold side of the brewing process, you'll see why we had to do that. But we're just gonna enrich our sugar water with oxygen and move it into one of our fermenters back there. So that is the hot side of the brewing process, the fastest part in the brewing process. When we go around to the other side of the brewery, we'll hit the cold, and then I promise you I'll stop talking. So again, let's go around the side, and we'll wrap it up soon. Next step we're gonna do is the cold side, which we call fermentation, where we create the alcohol in our beer. And this is the longest part of the brewing process. This is what takes the multiple weeks to create alcohol in your beer. So that's why we have so many actual fermenters back here, because if we put one beer in here, we don't have to wait 2 or 3 weeks before we create another beer. We can create a beer every day and put it in its own fermenter. That's why we have 7 fermenters right here in this L shape. We have our 2 big 30-barrel fermenters over there. We have 4 10-barrel fermenters behind which you can't see right now. So we have our fermenters. We're gonna hook up our orange meter hose to the bottom conical here, pump all that sugar water up into the tank, and pitch the yeast and start fermentation. Remember earlier I said we put a little oxygen in there? What's gonna happen first is the yeast is gonna eat the oxygen. And we need that to do that first because we need to know that the yeast is activated. If we don't put that oxygen, we're guessing if it's creating alcohol. We don't know what it's doing at all, but if it eats that oxygen first, it produces CO2. That CO2 will rise up, we con our CO2 release valve, run down the side of the tank into a bucket filled with water. And when that water starts bubbling, we know that yeast is activated. That's how we can tell that we're on the right track, the yeast is activated. When the water starts bubbling, we know it ran out of oxygen, and it's gonna eat the sugar next and start producing alcohol. So that's why we did that, put a little oxygen in there so we could start up the yeast and start doing its job. After it eats all the oxygen, it's gonna eat all the sugars, and a process we call the conditioning phase. This is what takes forever. This is why we have to wait forever to have a beer, because of the stupid alcohol in it. I mean, come on now. So we're gonna actually produce all the alcohol in there. No matter how much sugar you put in there means how long it's gonna take to actually produce all the alcohol. A basic beer takes around a week and a half to produce all that alcohol. After that, next stage we're gonna do, we call flocculation, or crashing our beer. We use gravity to remove the hops and barley. We're gonna use gravity again to remove most of the yeast. Again, when the yeast gets here, it looks like a giant bag of tapioca. If you put your hand in there, that's how it feels. You don't want those big old slugs of yeast in the end product of your beer, so we're just gonna use gravity again to remove that product. What we're gonna do is drop the temperature of this tank 30 degrees over the next 3 days. Since all these tanks are temperature controlled, we can actually control the temperature in them at all times. You drop the temperature, that's gonna make anything solid in here fall straight down. So that yeast is gonna fall down. That's why these tanks are cone shaped, so when all that yeast falls down, it's gonna pool at the bottom, and all the beer will pool on top, so we open that valve, we're not gonna waste any beer, and then when we see beer coming out of the pipe, we know that all the yeast is removed, most of the yeast is removed. So we're gonna crash our beer, next we'll rack it, open up that valve, and move that yeast to a new tank, and start the whole process over again. The yeast we get, when it eats alcohol, it naturally reproduces itself. It produces new cells. That happened around 7 to 8 times. So we can make around 7 to 8 batches with 1 pack of the yeast that we get here, because it's industrial strength yeast. It's really, really strong yeast. So we'll move that yeast to a new tank and start the whole process over again. After we flocculate our beer, the next stage is we have to decide if we want to leave it unfiltered or filter it. Unfiltered beer is awesome. You can't see through it at all, just like my Miami Weiss right here. It's super cloudy. And that's because of all the microscopic hops and barley still floating around in this tank. So we're thinking of Hefeweizen, stouts, porters. We want that full body taste. We want that high amount of malt flavor in that beer, or hop flavor, to actually adhere to that style of beer. If we're making our blonde or a lager, things like that, we want that removed, because that's not how the style of beer is made, and we want that nice, light, crisp taste of that beer. So it doesn't matter if you're making a filter, if you need your beer unfiltered, or leave it filtered. Okay, it just matters the style of beer you're trying to make. It means if you leave it, you need it filtered, or you want to leave it unfiltered. So what we're going to do, if we want it unfiltered, we'll just move it to our bright tank. But if we want to filter it, we just move our filtration machine, pretty much a giant metal box on wheels. We put it right here, put our filtering pads in it, and run the beer through it. Pretty simple. We just filter that beer and move it to one of our 6 bright tanks that you see in this oval shape right here. The next big issue we face is to actually put the CO2 back into our beers. Without CO2, or that nice little white film on top of each of your beers, all the wild yeast, pathogens, diseases, all those things in the air would jump right into your beer and make it go instantly flat. It would ruin your beer. We need CO2 to actually drink beer in the atmosphere in which we live in. Since we lost it all during this stage, we have to create more, and that's why we have our bright tanks right here, we call our CO2 machines. We're gonna run our CO2 hose to our carbonator, pump CO2 in this baby for about an hour, let it sit for 24. We'll be done with the whole brewing process now. We'll taste it, make sure the alcohol, IBU, flavoring is right where we want it, and then we'll be done. Next stage is we'll actually keg and bottle off from our bottom conical right there into our 2 means of transportation that you can see behind you, and we'll put those kegs in one of our 3 coolers and wait till one of the distribution companies come and pick up our beer. We have 10 distribution companies. They're actually going to pick up that beer, distribute it through the whole state of Florida. Here in Orlando, we're in tons of different places, like out there in Disney World, Universal Studios, Epcot. I just went to Epcot. They had our Browne Ale out there. International Drive out there, tons of bars, hotels, restaurants like the Rosens, Hiltons, Marriott's, all have our beer out there. ABC's, Total Wines, World of Beers, some Publixes, both the Whole Foods, all the way out there in Dr. Phillips and Winter Park have our beers. But if you want the full selection, you have to drive here so you can get all the beers that we have on tap, because we're always going to have all the beers we make here. Get any growlers, bottles, or kegs from us. Probably the best way to get the full selection of beer is to come here. But that's my spiel. I know it's a lot of information, but I've been on too many crappy tours. I never want to give one. I want you to take something away maybe you didn't know about the brewery or beer. Maybe you have a new new appreciation for how hard beer is to make and to make a good beer in despite of all that. So again, my name's James. If you guys want to take any pictures, go ahead. If you want to look around, I would love to show you more stuff if you're interested.
Hey guys, so I had a really good time just checking out the brewery here. I think it's awesome that they're organic, and it's one of the only organic breweries in the entire Southeast. So I think that was pretty special, and I hope you guys enjoyed the tour, because I did, and I tried 3 or 4 different types of beer. I like their porter. I wasn't a big fan of the blonde ale, but that's because it wasn't as full-bodied as I like, and that's not what it's trying to be. I also really enjoyed their brown ale, and then also they had an Irish red that they age in oak that has kind of a bourbon flavor that was really pretty cool. So guys, get out there and connect with people. Make sure you live your big story, and don't forget to do something every single day to help reduce world suck.